They tried to take the land, but the deed listed the dog's name, not as a pet, as a legal co-owner. While lawyers argued and bulldozers moved in, it was Shadow, the German Shepherd, who stood in the way alone. He wasn't barking randomly, he was speaking in code, and when the court refused to listen, his camera told the truth. This isn't just a fight for property, it's the story of a dog who understood loyalty deeper than any contract. If you believe some bonds are bigger than laws, stay with us. Like, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe if you're ready to witness what one dog did when no one else could. The gravel crackled beneath the tires of Malik's rusted Ford Ranger as it crawled up the winding path leading to the lakeside cabin. The early autumn breeze swept through the pines like a soft sigh, stirring leaves in slow-motion swirls as if the forest itself was waking from a long sleep. Malik sat quietly behind the wheel, his gloved hands still gripping the steering wheel even after the truck had come to a stop. He looked out at the cabin, the A-frame with its moss-covered roof and sun-bleached porch railings standing in quiet defiance against time. 15 years had passed since he'd last been here. It looked smaller now, weathered, tired, like it too had survived a fire. In the passenger seat, Shadow sat upright, ears perked, dark amber eyes scanning the unfamiliar territory. The black and tan German Shepherd had been Malik's partner during some of the worst fires in the state's history. He wasn't just a dog, he was a survivor, a warrior. The scar behind his right ear and the slight limp in his back leg were reminders of the building collapse in Phoenix that nearly killed them both. Since then, they'd been inseparable. Malik stepped out of the truck and took a deep breath. The scent of pine, wet bark, and lake water hit him like a memory. He closed his eyes and saw his uncle's silhouette. Big hands, deep laugh, always barefoot. Uncle Elijah had died of a stroke 6 months ago. Malik had missed the funeral, missed a lot of things actually over the years. But he was here now, and this cabin, this plot of land was all that remained of the only family that ever gave a damn about him. The screen door creaked open with a reluctant groan. Inside, dust blanketed every surface, but the layout remained untouched. The fireplace of river stones, the two-person couch that felt like it was built just for reading, and the antler chandelier Uncle Elijah made from a shed he found on a hike. Shadow padded in silently, nose low, tail cautious. He paused by the fireplace and let out a soft huff, his way of saying, "It's clear." They spent the rest of the day cleaning, airing out rugs, and unpacking supplies. Malik discovered old fishing rods, a jar of coins labeled gas money 1999, and, tucked behind a picture frame, a postcard from his mother. He didn't read it, not yet. That night, after lighting a fire and sipping lukewarm beer from a dusty can, Malik sat on the porch beside Shadow, who lay with his chin on his paws, eyes reflecting the glow of the flame. "Don't know if this was the right move," Malik whispered, "but maybe it's the only one left." Shadow didn't move, just flicked his ear as if to say, "One day at a time." The following morning, a knock came just as Malik was pouring the first cup of coffee. Not a gentle knock, it was firm, official. Shadow growled before the second knock even landed. Through the window, Malik saw 2 men and a woman, all in crisp navy uniforms, bearing the logo of the Pine Shore Lakeside Homeowners Association. "You Malik Jones?" the taller man asked. Malik nodded. "Depends who's asking." The woman stepped forward and handed him an envelope thick with forms. "Notice of violation and pending eviction," she said flatly. "You have 72 hours to comply." Malik blinked, trying to make sense of the language. "Eviction? This is my property. I inherited it. Per the HOA bylaws, you are in breach of safety regulations, noise ordinances, and unregistered residency," she replied. "I just got here." "Doesn't matter," said the shorter man. "The violations began the moment your pet stepped on the premises." Malik frowned, flipping through the pages. His eyes stopped on a clause labeled, "Canine violation, threat to community safety." "You're evicting me because of my dog?" "Not you," the woman clarified. "The eviction notice is addressed to Shadow. The dog is the problem. You're just his handler." Malik laughed, but it came out hollow. "You're joking." "You take threats seriously," the man said, glancing nervously at Shadow, who sat calmly behind Malik but didn't break eye contact. "There have been complaints, growling, intimidating posture. That's considered a behavioral red flag." He's a retired rescue dog, Malik said. He doesn't even bark unless you give him a reason. Regardless, the woman said, tucking a pen behind her ear. If the animal isn't removed from the property, further action will be taken. They left as quickly as they'd come, disappearing into a black HOA-banded SUV with tinted windows. Malik stood in the doorway for a long time, papers in hand, shadow beside him like a living statue. He dropped the envelope on the kitchen table and muttered, "Well, buddy, we're not exactly getting a warm welcome." That evening, Malik took Shadow on a walk down to the dock. The lake was still, reflecting the sky like a secret held too long. The sun dipped below the tree line and the chill in the air returned. As they walked back, Malik noticed a small red light blinking on the tree line, a motion camera facing directly toward the cabin. His jaw clenched, Shadow stopped, ears alert. He was already sensing it, the wrongness. "Looks like someone's been watching," Malik said under his breath. "Guess we're not alone out here after all." Shadow let out a single low growl. Malik didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch with his boots up on the railing and his eyes scanning the black sheet of the lake, broken only by the faint ripples of wind and the red blink of the surveillance camera he'd spotted. The notice still lay open on the kitchen table inside, and Shadow curled at his feet like a coiled spring of quiet readiness. Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was at play, that this wasn't just about property lines or barking complaints. It felt target. The next morning, Malik headed into town. Pine Shore had changed in 15 years. The old gas station was now a boutique espresso bar, the bait shop replaced by a realty office with posters of sparkling condos and white-roof developments. The town felt polished in a way that made his boots feel dirty just by walking down the sidewalk. Inside the HOA office, a glass-walled building with stone accents and chrome chairs, Malik stepped into the icy chill of manufactured hospitality. Behind the front desk sat a man who looked like he had a Bluetooth earpiece surgically attached to his head. "I'm here about the eviction notice," Malik said. The man glanced at the screen, frowned slightly. "Name, Malik Jones," he replied. The man typed, "Ah yes, Lot 12, Layside Perimeter, Jones Cabin. You'll want to speak to President Duvall." He gestured down a hallway lined with framed photos of ribbon cuttings and charity fundraisers. At the end of the corridor was a sleek office, wide windows overlooking the lake, and standing behind a desk was Claire Duvall. Late 40s, polished blonde hair and a tight chignon, posture like she owned the county. "Mr. Jones," she said, voice smooth as oiled wood. "We've been expecting you." Malik narrowed his eyes slightly. "Funny, I wasn't expecting to be welcomed with threats." She smiled without humor. "You don't issue threats. We enforce community standards. I trust you've read the violations." Malik stepped forward. "I read them. And I also read that you're trying to evict my dog." Claire's smile didn't falter. "We've had several complaints. Aggressive posture, predatory behavior. This is a family environment. We can't allow dangerous animals." "He's a rescue," Malik snapped. "A war survivor. He saved lives. He's trained better than most people I know." Claire's expression darkened just a shade, but she kept her voice steady. "You may not be aware, Mr. Jones, but I served 12 years in animal control. I've seen what trained dogs can do when they're triggered." Malik folded his arms. "Is that so?" Her eyes flicked to a certificate on the wall. County Division of Animal Control, Director Emeritus. His gaze dropped to the name beneath. That was when something clicked. Claire Duvall. A name he'd heard once before, years ago, in a news article, an exposé on a mass euthanasia order signed off during an internal scandal. One of the state's largest canine rehab centers had been decommissioned. Shadow had been pulled from the ashes of that raid by a firefighter who refused to let him burn. "You were the one who shut down Loma Creek Canine Recovery," Malik said slowly, piecing it together. Her smile froze. "They acted within policy. You ordered them burned," Malik said, voice cold. "And my dog, he was the only one that made it out alive." For a second, Claire's composure cracked. Her eyes narrowed. That center was a liability. The dogs were unstable. "We did what was necessary. You murdered working animals," Malik said, stepping forward. "And now you're doing the same thing but with paperwork instead of gasoline." Claire straightened. "Watch your tone. This isn't about history, it's about the community. And your cabin sits on land that, according to our updated maps, includes HOA a shoreline, specifically the dock you've been accessing. Malik stiffened. That dock's been there for 50 years, my uncle built it, which he never registered, Claire said smoothly. We've leased that waterfront to several members over the last 2 years. You're technically trespassing. Malik clenched his jaw. Show me the survey. She handed over a laminated printout, slick and too perfect, the kind made by a lawyer's intern rather than a state assessor. Malik left without another word. Back at the cabin, he pulled out the original deed his uncle kept in a metal box under the floorboards. Shadow watched from the doorway, tail still, ears alert. Malik ran his finger over the yellowed parchment, tracing the edge where the property line clearly extended 20 feet past the shoreline. They're lying, he said, almost to himself. But we need more than this. That evening, he walked with Shadow down to the dock. The wood creaked beneath their weight, aged but firm. The setting sun turned the lake into a pool of copper light. Malik looked down. Something caught his eye near the edge of the first piling. He knelt, pushed aside some moss, and saw it 3 parallel scratch marks, carved deep into the wood. Malik looked at Shadow. You smell something, he growled softly. Malik followed and found a second set of scratches, vertical this time, with faint initials beneath, e.g. 1979. Elijah Jones. You marked it, Malik whispered. You knew someone would try to take this. He looked out across the lake, toward the glint of modern condos rising on the opposite shore like glass teeth. Malik stood slowly, hand resting on Shadow's head. You want to fight? They'll get one. Behind them, in the trees, a soft click echoed. The surveillance camera blinked red again, but this time, it was pointed not at the cabin, but straight at them. Malik didn't flinch. He stared back at the lens, unblinking. You watching, Claire? He said softly. Watch this. Then he turned, and with Shadow at his side, he walked back toward the house, not knowing yet that tomorrow's dawn would bring something far more dangerous than just cameras and paperwork. The next morning, Malik rose early, unable to shake the restlessness that had settled into his bones since the HOA confrontation. The trees swayed in a rhythm that felt impatient. The lake shimmered with an edge too bright to be peaceful, and Shadow kept pacing the property line, nose twitching, ears always perked toward the woods. Malik poured his coffee and stepped outside, boots crunching over dry needles and patches of dirt still soaked from last night's brief storm. Something gnawed at him, not just anger, not even the sense of being hunted, but the feeling that this cabin was holding back a secret, like the walls had been listening for years and now waited for him to ask the right question. Shadow stopped at the edge of the garden. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just stood over a spot of soft earth and looked back at Malik with a gaze that said, dig here. Malik frowned. You is it, boy? He crouched down, pushing away the weeds and dead leaves. The soil crumbled easily under his fingers, as if it had been disturbed recently, or maybe years ago, and packed again with intent. He grabbed a small hand spade from the shed and began to dig. Shadow didn't move, just watched silently, his breathing slow but focused. 6 inches in, the sound changed. A dull metallic thunk echoed through the ground. Malik's hands slowed, then cleared away the last layer of earth to reveal the edge of an old rusted box, about the size of a toolbox, sealed with 2 corroded latches and a thick chain around its handle. Malik wiped the dirt away, heart beating faster, and undid the chain with a pair of bolt cutters from the shed. The lid creaked open, releasing a faint scent of oil, paper, and age. Inside was a folded cloth that held something heavy. When he unwrapped it, he found an old leather-bound journal, thick and brittle with time. Beneath it lay a rolled canvas map, its edges frayed, and a manila envelope marked in faded pen, "Confidential, do not sign." Malik sat on the porch steps, Shadow beside him like a statue as he opened the journal. The first page bore the scrawled name Elijah Jones. The handwriting was tight, deliberate, every line penned with intent. Malik turned pages slowly. Each entry was dated, stretching back more than 2 decades, detailing storms, repairs, sightings of deer and foxes. And then, halfway through, the entries shifted. June 12, 2009, Claire Duvall visited again, said she represented Lakeside Growth Partners. Offered to buy the property outright for $75,000, 0 cents. Said it was more than fair. I told her no. She smiled like a wolf and left without another word. Shadow barked for 2 straight hours that night. Malik turned the page. July 1, 2009. Convenient. Claire's name is now on the board. I've started documenting everything. I think they're trying to make a legal case to seize the land through zoning violations. They can try. Malik's fingers tightened on the pages. The man had seen it coming. All of it. He flipped to the map, unrolling it across the porch floor. It was hand-drawn but overlaid with surveyor coordinates, some in pencil, others in red ink. Malik grabbed the HOA survey Claire had given him and laid it side by side. The difference was staggering. The original map showed the Jones property stretching all the way to a natural inlet at the south edge of the lake, covering not only the disputed dock but nearly double the shoreline currently recognized by the HOA. On one corner of the original map, a note had been written in Elijah's sharp letters. Deed recorded under grandfather clause. Check County Office filed 1968 under EJ & Co. Malik sat back stunned. The property had legal weight that Claire had completely ignored or deliberately buried. He opened the manila envelope. Inside was a typed contract, never signed. Purchase agreement. MASH Lakeside Growth Partners offers acquisition of Jones Lake parcel lots 1112 South Shore Extension. The number typed next to total offer was laughable. $72,500, 0 cents. In red pen across the signature line, Elijah had written, "Not for sale, not now, not ever." Malik leaned back against the cabin wall, heart hammering with a mix of rage and awe. Claire had tried to buy the land quietly. When she was refused, she pivoted, joined the HOA, changed the rules, and now, years later, she was finishing what she started, only this time with an army of bylaws and fine print. "You were right, Uncle," Malik murmured. "You saw her coming." Shadow rested his head on Malik's knee, and Malik rubbed his ear gently. "Guess you knew where to dig for a reason." A distant car door slammed. Malik looked up. Across the lake, near the fancy condos on the opposite shore, a small white van with the HOA logo had pulled up. Men in maintenance uniforms unloaded what looked like floating barrels and section markers. Malik squinted through the trees. They were marking the cove again, his cove. He stood, clutching the journal and map, and marched back inside. His fingers moved with practiced urgency as he scanned for a scanner, anything to duplicate the document. He didn't want to bring the originals into town yet. He wasn't ready to trust anyone. Shadow barked once. Sharp. Malik turned. The sound had come from the path behind the cabin steps. Deliberate. Someone was coming, and they weren't trying to be quiet. Malik didn't move as the footsteps drew closer around the back of the cabin. Shadow was already in position, tail low, body tensed, standing perfectly still except for the slight twitch in his left ear, an old habit from training, triggered when something felt off. The steps halted just beyond the porch, near the back fence that marked the property's southern edge. Malik stayed crouched by the window, out of sight, the journal and map tucked behind a loose floorboard he'd lifted earlier. He had learned to trust Shadow's instincts long ago, back when they worked together in smoke-filled buildings and collapsing stairwells. But something about the dog's behavior lately was different, more deliberate. It wasn't just that he growled or barked when someone approached. It was the rhythm. That's what struck Malik now as he crouched in silence and thought back to the past few nights. Shadow had barked twice, paused, then once again. Another night, 3 short barks, then a single, drawn-out huff. At first, Malik thought it was just anxiety, but then he remembered the specialized training Shadow had received in the early days, training to signal through noise when verbal communication wasn't possible. He had been taught to mimic basic Morse code, and now, listening carefully, Malik could hear it again. Bark, bark, pause. A pattern. He mouthed it quietly to himself, recalling the code he hadn't needed in years. Pause. That's a U. Shadow barked again, short, long, short. Malik stood up slowly. He moved to the corner of the cabin and peered through the wooden slats, just in time to see 2 HOA maintenance workers in neon vests, walking along the edge of the garden. One of them carried a gray canister with a long nozzle spraying the flower beds. The other held a phone, angling it downward toward the garden. Malik's jaw clenched. They were spraying his land without warning. without reason. Then the man with the phone knelt down, pointed the lens toward the spot Shadow usually marked, and signaled for his partner to squirt a burst of liquid directly onto the soil. Shadow let out a guttural growl and took a single step forward. The man with the phone jumped back and shouted, Ho's aggressive posture, just like she said. The other nodded. Got it on video? That should do it. Malik stepped out from behind the wall, camera in hand. To what exactly, he called out. Both men stiffened. The one holding the sprayer nearly dropped it. Sir, we were authorized to apply selective herbicide in common spaces. HOA protocol. Malik raised an eyebrow. This is private land? My deed line ends 12 feet past that azalea bush. You're spraying my soil, the man stammered. We were told this section had been reassigned pending review. Reassigned without a legal transfer, Malik snapped. Try again. The man with the phone pocketed it quickly. Look, we were just following orders. From Claire? Malik asked. From the board, the man replied. And who's filming my dog while you trespass and poison my garden? They didn't answer. Malik took a slow breath, then whistled twice, sharp, quick bursts. Shadow trotted to his side and sat. Malik clipped a small black module from under Shadow's collar and held it up. You see, Shadow records everything. Body cam grouse. Warproof? Both men exchanged looks. We're leaving, one muttered. Probably best, Malik said, stepping aside. They hurried off down the path, their vests glowing faintly in the light of the late morning sun. Malik turned to Shadow and crouched beside him. Let's see what you got, partner. Inside, Malik plugged the module into his laptop. The feed opened with a time-stamped file list, each labeled by date and time. He scrubbed to the current day. The video showed everything, the men entering without permission. The spraying, the setup for the phone camera, the forced growl. And most importantly, it captured the command from the man with the phone. Make him look dangerous. I want a good angle for the complaint. Malik sat back in his chair, chest tight with fury. They're not just trespassing, they're manufacturing violations. He pulled out his old external hard drive and began compiling the footage with the scanned documents. The deed, the map, the rejected purchase offer. This wasn't about neighborhood rules. It was targeted harassment. And now he had proof. But something still gnawed at him. Why now? Why come after this cabin with such force after all these years? Why fabricate violations? Forge maps? Send cameras to spy on a veteran firefighter and his dog? Malik opened the journal again, flipping to the final pages. Shadow lay by the door, ears twitching each time a branch snapped outside. Malik's eyes caught an entry dated just weeks before Elijah died. They want the cove. I heard it again from the man at the hardware store. Claire's company is planning to build a full-service marina. Condos, boat slips, private docks, they need my shoreline. Without it, the access isn't deep enough, she offered again. When I said no, she smiled and said, some fights get easier when the other side is gone. Malik swallowed. This wasn't about Shadow. It never had been. This was about the land, about water rights, about profit disguised as policy. And if Claire thought he'd roll over like others before him, she had picked the wrong man and the wrong dog. He copied the files onto a flash drive, slipped it into a fireproof case and tucked it under the floorboard beside the journal. Just as he replaced the plank, Shadow let out a sharp pattern of barks. 3 short, 1 long. Malik froze. New code, he whispered. Back. The knock came at dusk, soft but steady, like someone who didn't want to be noticed but needed to be heard. Malik stood just inside the doorway, a hunting knife clipped discreetly to his hip, Shadow beside him silent and alert. They had been on edge since the last confrontation, and neither man nor dog had relaxed much since the video footage was captured. Malik opened the door slowly, letting it creak just enough to let the visitor know he was being watched. On the porch stood an older man in a worn windbreaker, the kind government employees wore when they didn't want to look official but couldn't help it. His ball cap read Pine Shore Fall Fest, and his eyes were tired in the way only guilt can exhaust someone. Mr. Jones, he asked, voice just above a whisper. Malik nodded. You need something? The man glanced around, then stepped forward quickly. You don't know me, name's Russell Burke. I'm on the HOA board, finance committee. Malik's posture stiffened. Then you're part of the problem. Not exactly, Russell said. That's why I'm here. I'm not supposed to be, but... He looked down at Shadow, who was sitting motionless, watching every twitch of the man's body. You remember the kid that fell in the lake last spring? Russell continued. It was cold, late March, snow still on the ground. Malik gave a slow nod. I read about it. Kid was pulled out by a dog. Russell smiled faintly. That was your dog. Shadow. My son. He wouldn't be alive if it weren't for that dog of yours. Malik's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Russell reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. That's why I'm here. Claire doesn't know I made copies. Malik stepped back, gestured with a tilt of his head. Come in. Once inside, with the blinds drawn and a pot of coffee between them, Russell laid the documents out on the table. We've had our suspicions for months, he said, flipping through line-item reports, emails, and budget breakdowns. Community dues have increased nearly 30% since Claire took over. But none of that's gone into infrastructure. No repairs, no new amenities, nothing. Instead, it's been funneled into development reserves. Malik narrowed his eyes. Development for what? That's just it, Russell said, sliding over a printed email chain. Turns out Lakeside Growth Partners Claire's real estate venture is hemorrhaging money. 3 of her condo builds failed inspection last year. 2 were hit with lawsuits over foundation defects. She's out of cash and behind on multiple commercial loans. Malik scanned the printouts. You're saying she's using HOA money to float her private business? Russell nodded, using it as a slush fund, essentially. But she can't keep it going much longer. The plan was always to expand the lakeside marina, then sell high-end slips to private buyers. But she needs your shoreline. It's the only place deep enough for large vessels. And your dock sits at the perfect angle for construction access. Without it, the whole resort is dead in the water literally. Malik leaned back slowly, breath steady but cold with realization. That's why she's pushing so hard, not just for control, she's desperate. Russell looked at him with grim confirmation. Exactly, that's why the violations, the cameras, the threats. If you hold out, she loses her golden ticket. If she breaks you, she gets to survive. Malik turned back to the documents. And this? He asked, pointing to a ledger labeled Emergency Infrastructure Expenditures. That's the cover. She's classifying her fund transfers as pre-approved utility upgrades. The problem is, there's no paper trail showing board approval. No vote, no minutes. She's making executive decisions outside the bylaws. Malik's mind raced. The footage of the garden poisoning, the falsified property maps, the fake complaints, now all of it was stacking into something more than corruption. It was criminal. You're willing to testify? Malik asked. Eventually, Russell said. But I have to be careful. Claire's well connected. Her cousin's the county clerk and her husband plays poker with the sheriff every Thursday. You need to be smart. Malik nodded slowly. I've been collecting my own file. When the time comes, I'll make it public. Russell hesitated, then pulled out a flash drive. This has everything you need to link the accounts. Wire transfers, contract signings, internal emails. Just don't let it fall into the wrong hands. Malik took it, thumbed the smooth plastic edge. Russell chuckled nervously. Guess he remembers me. Malik gave a rare smile. He remembers everything. After the door closed, Malik inserted the drive into his laptop. The data confirmed everything. Payments from the HOA's official account to an entity called LGP Operations LLC, which had the same tax ID as Lakeside Growth Partners. Attached invoices described land surveys, dock renovations, and community rebrand, all conveniently vague, all totaling over $600,000. But then Malik found something else. A memo from Claire herself, written 2 months prior. Phase 1 contingent on Parcel 12 acquisition. If no voluntary transfer, proceed with alternate compliance enforcement methods. Timeline non-negotiable, investors growing impatient. Malik stared at the screen. Parcel 12 was his lot, alternate compliance enforcement was code for harassment. And the timeline? It explained the sudden escalation. She wasn't just breaking laws, she was trying to bury him before the next quarterly meeting. He backed up the drive to 2 separate locations, encrypted both, and burned a copy onto DVD just in case. The fire crackled behind him, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Shadow shifted, ears turning toward the window again. Malik stood, stepped quietly to the window and peered through a narrow slit in the curtain. Down near the road, headlights blinked off. A dark SUV sat idling. No one got out. The morning after Russell's visit, Malik awoke to the sharp chill of dead silence. No hum from the refrigerator, no buzz of the porch light's motion sensor, no gurgle from the water pipes when he turned the sink. At first he thought it was a blown fuse, maybe a tripped circuit, but then he stepped outside and saw the red tag taped to the breaker box with the bold words, "Emergency maintenance, do not tamper." Next to it, a matching yellow tag was zip-tied around the water shutoff valve. Malik's breath came out in a fog. He yanked both notices down and read the fine print. Pine Shore Lakeside HOA has initiated urgent infrastructure upgrades affecting your unit. Estimated completion, 1421 business days. Malik knew what it meant. This wasn't a coincidence or poor timing. This was pressure. He walked to the edge of his driveway where the gravel met the road and looked at the other houses nearby. Every one of them had power. Porch lights glowed in the morning haze. HVA systems hummed behind vent grates. Sprinklers ticked rhythmically on green lawns. Just his place stood in the cold like a forgotten outpost. He went back inside, lit a fire, boiled water on the old iron wood stove, and began taking stock of supply. Shadow watched him without moving, ears flicking toward every creak outside. "They're trying to freeze us out," Malik muttered. "Starve us, push us into submission like they did with the Hendersons." He'd read about it in the journal. His uncle had documented the same tactic years ago. Power shutoffs labeled as maintenance. Water lines drained under the guise of inspections. Every inconvenience disguised as bureaucracy. And every target someone who had refused to sell. By the third day, with no power and dwindling bottled water, Malik had rigged a makeshift generator powered by a lawnmower engine and some old batteries he found in the shed. He had just wired enough juice to charge his laptop and run one lamp when Shadow began pacing near the back wall of the cabin. The dog's behavior was different. No barking, no alert growls, just low movements circling one section of wall beneath the stairs. Nose pressed close, tail stiff with concentration. Malik crouched beside him. "What is it, boy?" Shadow pawed at a knothole, then sat, eyes fixed on Malik. Malik pressed against the wall and felt a shift, a faint draft, the slightest give beneath his palm. He grabbed a hammer and gently pried at the wooden paneling until a section popped free with a dry crack. Behind it was a crawl space about the size of a footlocker, dusty and dense with cobwebs, the air old and metallic. Inside, covered in a canvas wrap, was a small gray safe with a mechanical dial and a tag taped to the top in faded ink. "For Malik, if you ever come back." Malik stared for a moment, then reached for his flashlight, heart thudding. The combination was scrawled on the tag's reverse side in Elijah's unmistakable print. April 7th, 22. He spun the dial slowly, hands steady despite the cold. The lock clicked open, and inside sat a small stack of documents wrapped in plastic, a flash drive, and a sealed envelope marked Addendum to Will Legal Copy. Malik pulled it all out and spread it across the table under the flickering lamplight. The documents were notarized, signed 6 months before Elijah's death. They outlined the transfer of property to Malik, but the second page held something strange. Under secondary party and designated caretaker of legacy property, a name had been typed in all caps, Shadow. Malik blinked. Below it, the text read, "In recognition of service, protection, and companionship, Shadow shall be recognized as co-beneficiaries of the property known as Parcel 12. In the event of challenge, this designation asserts that both Malik Jones and Shadow, his service canine, possess inseparable interests in said property." A laugh escaped Malik's throat, short and stunned. "You really did it," he whispered. "You left the land to a dog." He turned the page and found a letter tucked inside. It was handwritten and dated just days before Elijah passed. "Malik," it began, "if you're reading this, they've made their move. Claire's not going to stop until she owns every inch of this lake, and you are the last real obstacle. I couldn't hold them off forever, but I knew you'd come back one day. I knew Shadow would lead you here. The world won't understand leaving land to a dog, but you and I both know Shadow isn't just a dog. He's family, and he'll protect this place long after I'm gone." Malik closed the letter, exhaled hard, and glanced over at Shadow, who sat perfectly still, as if he too remembered every word his former master had ever said. That night, as snow began to fall lightly on the cabin roof, Malik scanned the documents, duplicated the flash drive, and backed everything up to an encrypted cloud server. The generator buzzed faintly in the corner, its rhythm steady but strained. Outside, in the distance, a faint metallic clunk echoed from the direction of the dock, followed by hurried footsteps on wet leaves. Shadow raised his head and let out a soft, deliberate bark, 2 short, 1 long, 1 short. Morse code again. Malik mouthed a pattern, D-A-N-G. Before he could finish, the sound of something splintering against wood rang out from the front yard. The morning after the footsteps and the splitting wood outside his cabin, Malik rose with a bitter resolve burning low in his gut, the kind of heat that didn't fade with firelight or fear. The porch rail had been pried loose during the night, deep gouges torn into the cedar as if someone had tried to stage a break-in but aborted at the last second. The only clue left behind was a muddy boot print half imprinted at the base of the steps, too clean to be a random wanderer, too deliberate to be a mistake. Malik didn't need confirmation. Claire was tightening the noose, but she had underestimated one thing. He wasn't just fighting for a house. He was fighting for legacy. That afternoon, after stashing the addendum to Elijah's will and the co-beneficiary letter securely in a waterproof pouch beneath the floorboards, Malik took Shadow and drove into the next county over, where he remembered his uncle once mentioned meeting with a lawyer who actually gave a damn about trees, water, and the truth. He found the name folded inside the back of the journal: Elaine Whitmore, Esquire, environmental attorney, specialist in water rights and legacy zoning. Her office was hidden in a converted barn nestled between 2 hills outside of Barrow Ridge, its windows framed in ivy and a carved wooden sign that simply read, W.H. Whitmore and Wild. Malik parked out front, Shadow alert in the passenger seat, and walked through the creaky red door just as the sun angled low enough to paint the fields in amber. Elaine Whitmore was in her late 50s, silver-streaked braid over one shoulder, sharp eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses, and a voice that didn't bother wasting time on pleasantries. "Elaine's nephew?" she asked the moment she saw Malik. "Come in, I've been expecting you for 10 years. Malik sat down across from her in a room that smelled like old law books, rain, and cedar. Shadow sat at his feet, silent but focused. Elaine opened a drawer, pulled out a thin, dust-covered folder, and laid it on the table between them. "Your uncle was a stubborn man," she said, "but he wasn't paranoid. He knew what Claire was building." Malik unfolded the documents inside surveys, affidavits, a detailed zoning history of Pine Shore dating back to 1968. One map in particular caught his eye, a color-coded overlay of lake access regions. "That's your shoreline," Elaine said, pointing to the stretch marked in dark green. "According to original deeds and riparian rulings, that strip belongs to the Jones family. Not just land, but the water attached to it, 68 feet of continuous frontage, plus full riparian rights as defined by the Minnesota Public Waters Code." Malik nodded slowly. "Claire says it's HOA-owned shoreline. She even leased dock access to tenant." Elaine's eyes narrowed. "Then she's guilty of fraud. Unless the deed was reissued and signed by Elijah, which it wasn't. I have the affidavit. Then your claim supersedes any zoning reclassification passed by the HOA. They can't overrule property law with neighborhood policy." Malik tapped the addendum he brought. "There's one more thing." Elaine blinked once, then read the line aloud. "In recognition of service, protection, and companionship, Shadow shall be recognized as co-beneficiary of the property." She sat back and exhaled. "That's bold, rare, but not unheard of. Minnesota recognizes non-human beneficiaries if properly documented and notarized. Your uncle used a living trust model. That means Shadow's rights are real, legal, and in a zoning dispute he technically counts as a vested interest." Malik raised an eyebrow. "The dog can own property now?" Elaine chuckled dryly. "Not quite, but if Shadow is recognized as a co-beneficiary, then any attempt to claim full ownership of the land, especially by entities like the HOA, now involves a third party that can't be ignored, which makes the property legally disputed. And as long as it's under dispute, no development, no construction, and no demolition can legally proceed." Malik leaned back in the creaking chair, letting that sink in. "So you're telling me the HOA can't touch the shoreline because my dog owns it too?" Essentially, Elaine said. And it gets better. If Claire has already begun construction or leased space based on a false boundary, and you can prove she profited off land she doesn't own, she could be on the hook for civil damages, possibly criminal misrepresentation. Malik stood slowly. Then it's time to play offense. Elaine smiled for the first time. I thought you might say that. Before he left, she handed him a notarized summary letter stating that, based on submitted documents and legal precedent, Parcel 12, including all associated shoreline and structures, was under the legal stewardship of both Malik Jones and co-beneficiary Shadow K9. Malik took the letter, drove back through the lengthening dusk with Shadow's head resting on the center console, and stopped only once at the Pine Shore County Courthouse, where he submitted a request for injunctive relief to freeze all HOA-initiated construction near Parcel 12 pending full title verification. The clerk blinked twice when she read the co-beneficiary section, but stamped the paperwork without question. By the time they returned to the cabin, a county vehicle was already parked near the property line, yellow caution tape flapping in the wind, a folded notice nailed to the dock's post reading, "Access suspended property under review." Malik stepped onto the porch, took a slow breath and turned to Shadow. "You ready, partner?" Shadow gave a single sharp bark, short, clean, confident. A code Malik didn't need to translate. It meant yes. Somewhere beyond the trees, headlights flicked on again. Malik woke to the low, mechanical rumble of diesel engines, a sound that didn't belong in the early silence of Pine Shore. The lake still wore the shimmer of dawn mist, but the air was already split by the sharp clank of metal treads crawling up the gravel road toward the cabin. Shadow stood rigid at the foot of the bed, ears forward, tail bristling, letting out a single warning bark that bounced like a gunshot off the pine-trimmed walls. Malik threw on his boots, pulled on the hoodie he kept draped over the chair, and stepped outside into the growing thrum of tension. At the edge of the clearing, two large flatbed trucks idled, one carrying a small orange backhoe, the other loaded with fencing material and stacks of plastic bins. A group of workers in reflective vests stood talking to a woman in a tailored cream coat, carried a vowel arms crossed, expression taut with calculation. "This property's under county injunction," Malik called out, stepping between her and the porch steps. "You're trespassing and you know it." Claire turned slowly, her smile practiced razor thin. "We've received revised clearance," she said smoothly. "Emergency action, health and safety risk. Your foundation has been declared structurally unsound." Malik took a step forward. "You're lying. I have official documentation that says otherwise. I filed injunction, I filed title dispute, and I have rights, so does my Claire's eyes darted to Shadow, who now stood beside Malik, posture unmoving, gaze locked on the bucket of the backhoe like it was a wild animal ready to strike. "That's not legally binding," she hissed. "It's just a dog." "He's more than that," Malik said. "And if you touch this house, you're violating state law." The backhoe operator revved the engine and began moving the arm. Gravel crunched beneath the tracks as the machine lurched forward, bucket raised, inching toward the porch. Shadow exploded into motion, not with rage, not with violence, but with purpose. He sprinted across the yard and positioned himself directly beneath the steel claw, barking 3 times sharp, echoing, commanding. The operator froze. Claire shouted, "Move the dog," but the man inside the cab shook his head. "He's too close, I'm not risking it." Another worker raised his phone to film. "That's the dog that pulled that kid out the lake," he murmured to no one in particular. Malik stepped between them again, holding up the legal order from the county clerk's office, now laminated and folded into his back pocket. "You so much as scrape this property, I swear I'll file criminal trespasser, animal endangerment, and obstruction of due process." A moment of quiet tension hung in the air, broken only by Shadow's rhythmic barking, one short, one long repeated. The operator cut the engine. Claire's face went pale. Across the street, an elderly woman in a cardigan peeked through her curtains with a phone raised. 2 teenagers on bikes stopped at the end of the road and began filming with wide eyes. Within hours, the video surfaced online, first on a neighborhood forum, then on a local watchdog Facebook group, and finally picked up by an animal rights advocacy account with over 500,000 followers. The caption read, "Rescue dog stops bulldozer to protect veteran's cabin from illegal HOA demolition." The comments exploded. "That dog's a hero. Is this even legal? By nightfall, the footage had racked up hundreds of thousands of views. Regional news stations reached out to Malik for statements, but he declined all interviews. He wasn't interested in 15 seconds of sympathy. He wanted justice. The next day, just before noon, a woman in a worn green trench coat and combat boots knocked on Malik's door, press credentials dangling from her neck, eyes sharp and tired like someone who hadn't stopped chasing shadows in years. "Malik Jones?" she asked. "I'm Nora Wen, investigative journalist with The Observer. You and I need to talk." Malik hesitated, then stepped aside. "I don't talk to media." "I'm not here for a story," she replied. "I'm here because I've been following Claire Duval for over a year. And what she did to you, it's not the first time." Malik poured coffee while Nora spread documents across the table, manila folders. Printed emails, scanned court filings. 2 years ago, a retired couple on the south side of Lake Adder tried to stop her development project. She said her cat went missing after their water got shut off. A week later, HOA cited them for unsanitary conditions, then condemned the property. She flipped another folder open. 3 months later, a single mother in Clear Creek fought a noise ordinance that targeted her therapy dog. The dog disappeared. Days later, she was cited for unauthorized fencing. Her house was bulldozed after a storm. Malik's jaw tightened. "She targets pets. She targets bond," Nora said. "Family. Any emotional anchor that keeps people from folding. And she uses HOA bylaws as cover." She pulled out a file labeled Duval Holdings Internal Email Leak. Her LLC, Lakeside Growth Partners, is funneling HOA funds into staged acquisitions. She sends offers, gets denied, then starts a compliance campaign. Once they crack, she flips the land. Malik flipped through one of the emails dated 18 months ago. The subject line read, "Pet Policy Enforcement Leverage Tactic." The body read simply, "Non-compliant owners with high pet visibility tend to cave faster. Emotional leverage remains effective. Maintain ambiguity in policy language." He looked at Shadow, who sat quietly at the doorway, eyes watching Nora with patient calculation. "You're saying this was planned," Malik said. "Targeted." "Every step," Nora replied. "I have 2 more sources ready to go public if this case breaks open. But I need you to stand firm. You're the one with legal standing and the internet's attention." Malik stood, walked to the window, and watched as another car drove slowly past, its occupants staring toward the cabin. "I didn't ask for attention," he muttered. "You," Nora said. "But you earned it. And if you want to take her down, now's your chance." Behind them, Shadow stood and growled once, low and not toward Nora, but toward the trees behind the house, where a shadow had moved too quietly to be a deer. The courthouse smelled like old air and cheap disinfectant, and Malik had never felt more out of place in his life. The courtroom itself was sterile, beige walls lined with half-dead plants, a judge whose robe looked like it hadn't been dry-cleaned in a year, and the uncomfortable buzz of whispered conversations echoing from every corner. But none of it mattered. Today wasn't about setting foot in a system that had failed so many people like him. Today was about Shadow, about Elijah, about holding the line for something no one else seemed willing to fight for. Claire sat at the opposite table in an expensive black blazer, posture perfect, lips pursed in a half-smile that oozed control. Her lawyers flanked her like sentinels, each armed with his only pressed shirt, sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp. Shadow sat obediently beside his chair, tail still, head held high, a silent presence in the room that had already become legendary after the viral bulldozer video. The judge, a weathered man with a tired voice and eyebrows like overgrown moss, cleared his throat. Case number 22-4789, Jones versus Pine Shore Lakeside Homeowners Association. We'll begin with testimony. The HOA's first witness took the stand, a middle-aged man named Keith Withers, one of the maintenance workers Malik recognized from the day they sprayed the garden. He looked uneasy from the moment he entered, avoiding eye contact with Malik and constantly shifting in his seat. Claire's attorney stood and adjusted his tie. "Mr. Withers, can you tell us what you observed on the morning of April 7th? Keith nodded nervously. "Yes, I was assigned to conduct a landscape safety check at the Jones property. The dog Shadow came at me barking aggressively. I feared for my safety." The attorney leaned forward. "Would you describe the dog's behavior as hostile?" "Yes," Keith replied. very hostile. He lunged. Malik didn't move, didn't speak, just stared, knowing every word was a lie. He reached down and touched Shadow's shoulder lightly, a silent cue. Shadow stood, paced forward a few steps toward the bench, and then stopped. Ears perked, eyes locked on Keith. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Jones, control your dog. He is controlled," Malik said calmly. "He just doesn't like liars." Keith's voice wavered. He's doing it again, see?" "Your Honor," Malik said, "permission to show a video from the same date and time that contradicts this testimony." The judge gestured tiredly. "Proceed." Malik walked up, plugged in a USB drive, and the screen behind the judge lit up. The courtroom watched in silence as the footage from Shadow's collar played. Two men spraying the garden, one of them turning toward the camera and clearly saying, "Make him look dangerous. I want a good angle for the complaint." A collective murmur rose in the room. The judge raised a hand for silence. Keith turned white. Shadow let out a low bark, short, then long, then short again. Keith flinched. The courtroom froze. Malik stepped forward. "He knows you're lying. You know you're lying. Maybe it's time you told the truth." Keith looked toward Claire, who shook her head almost imperceptibly. But Shadow took another step forward. Muscles coiled not in aggression but in certainty, the kind of pressure that unraveled a conscience. "All right," Keith said suddenly, voice cracking. "All right, fine. We were told to say that. We were told to document violations. She paid us extra for complaints that would stick." The courtroom exploded. Reporters at the back typed furiously. The judge banged his gavel. Claire's lawyers scrambled to respond, but the damage was done. The video, the bark, the confession, it all hit like a hammer. Malik said nothing. He didn't need to. The judge called for recess, and when the hearing resumed an hour later, Claire was no longer smiling. Her attorneys tried to regroup, tried to reframe the narrative, but it was over. By late afternoon, the ruling came down, injunctions granted. Property recognized as jointly held by Malik and Shadow. All development orders suspended. And an official referral made to the district attorney to investigate misuse of HOA funds and possible fraud. Malik stood in the hallway outside the courtroom, head down, arms resting on the bench behind him as the judge's words echoed faintly in his memory. Shadow sat beside him, calm and silent. "You did good," Malik whispered. "You did better than I ever could." Reporters hovered outside the courthouse doors, flashes clicking every few seconds. But Malik ignored them. He just wanted to get home. The drive back to the lake was quiet, the sun low and lazy across the treetops, but the second they turned onto the gravel road leading to the cabin, Malik's got twisted. The front gate was half off its hinges, and one of the porch beams was splintered clean through. Malik slammed the brakes, jumped out, and sprinted to the door. It was cracked open. Inside, chairs were overturned, drawers yanked out, papers strewn across the floor. Shadow trotted in behind him, nose working fast, tail rigid. Then he stopped, turned toward the back of the house, and whined. Malik followed. The kitchen window had been smashed, and a trail of muddy boot prints led from the entryway toward the back shed. That's when he saw it: blood. A smear of it across the floorboards and more dripping from the edge of the deck outside. "Shallows," Malik whispered. But the dog had already disappeared around the corner. Malik ran. Behind the shed, near the edge of the woods, Shadow stood trembling. One front leg bent awkwardly, a gash along his ribs glistening dark in the fading light. A low growl trembled from his throat, and in the leaves beyond him, a black duffel bag sat torn open, its contents spilling out: security gear, zip ties, a stun baton. Malik dropped to his knees beside Shadow, hands hovering. "Easy boy, I'm here, I'm here." Shadow licked his head down against Malik's thigh, eyes fluttering closed. Malik bit back the rising panic in his throat and reached for his phone, fingers shaking as he died. The veterinarian did all she could. The puncture wounds had been deep, tearing through muscle and into Shadow's ribs. And although Malik had driven him to the county animal hospital within 20 minutes of finding him behind the shed, it was already too late for surgery. They bandaged the wounds, administered painkillers, and told Malik that the best they could do now was keep him comfortable. Malik stayed beside him every second, sleeping on the clinic floor with his back against the metal exam table, his hand resting on Shadow's side as the dog breathed in slow, shallow rhythm. He talked to him constantly, not just about the fight, not about Claire or Court, but about Arizona, about the first fire they'd worked together, about the creek they found off the beaten trail where Shadow had chased trout through ankle-deep water like a puppy, about Elijah's stew recipe, the one that always burned a little because he used too much chili powder. And Shadow listened. His ears flicked at familiar names. His tail gave the smallest thump when Malik mentioned the old couch they weren't supposed to nap on. On the third morning, just before sunrise, Shadow stirred. Malik opened his eyes and met his gaze calm, steady, proud. Shadow lifted his head once, touched his nose gently to Malik's chest, and exhaled. Then, he didn't inhale again. Malik didn't cry at first. He just held him, sitting on the cold tile floor while the sky turned from purple to gold beyond the windows, his hand resting over Shadow's still warm shoulders. It wasn't until he saw the slight tilt of Shadow's head, frozen in that final moment like he was still listening, that Malik broke. The vet gave him privacy, and when he walked out hours later with Shadow wrapped in Elijah's old wool blanket, she placed a small device in his palm, fell from his collar. She said gently, "Looked important." Malik recognized it instantly, the Micro America he'd installed weeks ago. The storage had been full, but it backed up wirelessly, and the internal chip saved the last 30 minutes. He didn't open it at first, not until 2 days later when the ache in his chest finally settled into something quieter, something solid. He sat in the cabin, the air silent, the fire low, and plugged the device into his laptop. The screen flickered to life. The footage opened not on the woods, not on the attack, but on a grainy room filled with shadows and the voices of people who didn't know they were being watched. Claire stood at the center of a long table, flanked by 3 men Malik recognized from court board members, financial officers, HOA executives. "He'll break," Claire said in the footage. "Everyone breaks eventually. We just need one more push, hit the dog, make it look like an accident. He'll cave. They always do when something they love gets hurt." One of the men shifted. "What if he does? Then we bury him in lawsuits until he drowns in paperwork." "We already have the media spin ready," another voice interjected. "And if the dog dies?" Claire's response was a shrug. "Collateral, it's an animal. The lake will forget." Malik watched the entire video in silence. Then he uploaded it to every platform he had his site Norwin's inbox, local news forums, a dozen animal rights groups. Within 12 hours, it went viral again. Within 48, the district attorney had launched an official investigation. Claire Duvall was served with charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted coercion, and animal cruelty. She was arrested outside her gated community, her expression caught on camera for the world to see. Not composed, not elegant, but terrified. But justice wasn't enough. Malik needed something more, something for Shadow. He spent the next month pouring everything he had into rebuilding the cabin, not just as a home, but as a sanctuary. He named it the Porter Refuge in honor of Elijah, and registered it as a non-profit retreat center for veterans and their service animals. With donations pouring in from supporters across the country, Malik expanded the deck, installed solar power, built 3 extra sleeping cabins along the ridge, and cleared a walking trail that led down to the lake where he and Shadow had spent so many mornings watching the mists rise. And there, at the very edge of the shoreline, Malik placed a bronze statue carved by a local sculptor. A German shepherd standing proud, facing the lake, ears alert, tail still, eyes calm. At the base, etched in stone, were the words, "This is our land because you fought until your last breath." Visitors came every week. Some brought flowers, some brought old collars, medals, or handwritten notes. One man left a folded American flag with a tag that simply read, "For the one who stood guard when no one else would." Children played near the trail, veterans told stories around the fire pit, and every evening as the sun dipped low and the lake lit up like molten gold, Malik stood by the statue and listened. Some days there was nothing, but on others, just as the wind curled around the trees and skimmed across the surface of the water, he swore he heard it, a single, distant bark carried across the lake, steady and strong, and he smiled knowing it wasn't an echo, it was a promise. Shadow hadn't left, he had just gone ahead to hold the line. If this story moved you, take a second to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. I'm curious what moment hit you the hardest. And where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment and let's talk about it.